In the marble corridors of Thornbridge Palace, where whispers carry the weight of nations and a single document can topple crowns, Lady Catherine Whitmore thought her secrets were safe behind locked doors. She was wrong. When Prince Alexander discovered the encrypted files hidden in his wife's private study, he faced an impossible choice: protect the woman he loved or defend the throne that defined his existence. But some betrayals cut so deep that even royal blood cannot wash them clean, and some commands, once given, can never be taken back. The morning mist clung to Thornbridge Palace like a shroud, obscuring the ancient stone walls that had witnessed centuries of royal intrigue. Prince Alexander Thornbridge stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose gardens below. At 38, he possessed the commanding presence that came naturally to those born to rule, but today his shoulders carried an unusual burden. Behind him, the ornate mahogany desk was cluttered with documents that would have sent tremors through the kingdom's political establishment had their contents become public. Financial records, diplomatic cables, and, most damning of all, a series of encrypted files that bore his wife's digital signature. Lady Catherine Whitmore had entered his life like a breath of fresh air during his darkest period. The daughter of a respected diplomat, she possessed an intelligence that matched her beauty and a compassion that had slowly healed the wounds left by his previous failed relationships. Their marriage, 3 years ago, had been celebrated as a love match rather than a political alliance, a rarity in royal circles. Yet here he stood, confronting evidence that the woman he trusted above all others had been systematically accessing classified state documents for months. The soft knock at his study door interrupted his brooding thoughts. "Enter," he called, his voice carrying the authority that had been drilled into him since childhood. Captain James Morrison, head of palace security, stepped into the room with the measured gait of a career military man. His weathered face bore the expression of someone delivering news he wished he didn't have to share. "Your Highness," Morrison began, his tone carefully neutral, "we've completed our preliminary investigation into the security breach. The evidence is comprehensive." Alexander turned from the window, his jaw set in a hard line. "Show me." Morrison activated the large screen mounted on the study wall, displaying a timeline of digital access logs. The breaches began approximately 6 months ago. Someone with administrative privileges has been accessing files from the Foreign Office, Treasury, and most concerningly, classified intelligence reports. The prince's hands clenched at his sides as he studied the data. Each entry was time-stamped and traced back to Catherine's personal access codes. Is there any possibility these codes were compromised? Used by someone else? We considered that possibility, sir. However, the access patterns align perfectly with Lady Catherine's known schedule. The breaches occurred during times when she was confirmed to be in the palace, often in her private study. Additionally, several of the access documents were printed using her personal printer. Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of kingship settling heavily upon his shoulders. His father, King Edmund, had ruled for 42 years with an iron hand disguised by a velvet glove. The lesson had been clear from Alexander's earliest memories. The crown came first, always. Personal feelings, no matter how deep, could never supersede duty to the realm. What specific documents were accessed? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. Morrison's fingers danced across his tablet, bringing up a new display. Trade negotiations with the Meridian Republic, defense contracts with allied nations, and most seriously, Operation Nightingale. The blood drained from Alexander's face. Operation Nightingale was a covert intelligence operation that had taken years to develop. Its exposure could compromise agents in the field and destroy relationships with key allies. Who else knows about this? Only myself and Agent Sarah Collins from Internal Security. We've maintained complete discretion as per your standing orders regarding family matters. Alexander nodded, grateful for Morrison's loyalty. The captain had served the royal family for over 2 decades and understood the delicate balance between duty and discretion that palace life demanded. I need to speak with Catherine immediately. But first, I want those files secured. Change all access codes and implement additional security measures. Nothing of this sensitivity should be accessible without dual authorization going forward. Already in progress, sir. However, there's something else you need to know. Morrison hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal. Lady Catherine attempted to access the Nightingale files again this morning. The attempt was blocked by our new security measures, but she made multiple tries using different approaches. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Even faced with heightened security, Catherine had continued trying to access classified materials. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, ongoing breach of trust that struck at the very heart of national security. "Where is she now?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In the East Wing Gardens, sir." "She's been there for about an hour, according to the security detail." Alexander straightened his shoulders, drawing upon the strength that had sustained the Thornbridge line through wars, revolutions, and political upheavals. "Thank you, Captain Morrison. Please ensure that this information remains strictly confidential until I determine how to proceed. And Morrison?" He paused at the door. "Have the Queen Consort security detail increase their vigilance. I fear this situation may become more complex before it's resolved." As Alexander made his way through the palace corridors toward the East Wing, servants and staff members bowed respectfully, unaware that their future king was walking toward what might be the most difficult conversation of his life. The portraits of his ancestors seemed to watch him with stern disapproval, their painted eyes reminding him of the sacrifices previous monarchs had made in service to the crown. The East Wing Gardens were Catherine's sanctuary, a place she had lovingly redesigned after their marriage, to include rare flowering plants from around the world. Alexander found her there, kneeling beside a bed of white roses, her dark hair catching the morning sunlight. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting up with the warm smile that had first captured his heart. "Alexander, I wasn't expecting you until lunch. How did the morning meetings go?" Her voice carried its usual musical quality, betraying no hint of guilt or concern. He studied her face carefully, searching for any sign of deception. Catherine had always been difficult to read, a quality he had once found intriguing but now viewed with suspicion. "Catherine, we need to talk." "About your recent activities." Something flickered in her green eyes, so quickly he almost missed it. "My activities?" "I'm not sure what you mean." "The computer access logs, Catherine. The classified files. The repeated attempts to breach security protocols." Each word fell between them like stones, creating a chasm that widened with every syllable. Catherine stood slowly, brushing the soil from her gardening gloves with deliberate care. When she finally looked at him, the warmth had vanished from her expression, replaced by something harder and more calculating. "I suppose there's no point in denying it," she said quietly. "Though I had hoped we might have more time before this conversation became necessary." The casual admission stunned Alexander more than any elaborate denial might have. "More time?" "Catherine, you've been systematically violating national security protocols for months. You've accessed classified intelligence that could compromise ongoing operations and endanger lives. How could you do this to us, to the crown?" Catherine's laugh held no humor. "To us? To the crown? Alexander, you speak as if they're the same thing, but they're not. The crown is an institution that demands everything and gives nothing in return. It's consumed your father, it's consuming you, and it would have consumed me too, if I hadn't fought back." "Fought back? Is that what you call treason?" The word hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Catherine's face went pale, but her chin lifted defiantly. "Treason? I call it survival. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in a gilded cage, Alexander? To have every move monitored, every word analyzed, every thought suspect? I needed to understand what was really happening around me, what decisions were being made that would affect not just the kingdom, but our future together." Alexander felt something inside him breaking. A fundamental trust that once shattered could never be fully repaired. "And what gave you the right to make that decision? What gave you the right to risk everything our families have built for centuries? The same thing that gives you the right to make decisions that affect millions of people without consulting them."
Catherine shot back.
"Power, Alexander. The power that comes from position and privilege. The only difference is that I chose to use mine to gain knowledge rather than to control others." The conversation was spiraling beyond anything Alexander had prepared for. This wasn't the Catherine he had married, the woman who had seemed to understand and accept the responsibilities that came with royal life. This was someone else entirely, someone who viewed the monarchy not as a sacred trust, but as an adversary to be outwitted. "Who else knows about this?" he asked, his voice taking on the cold authority he had learned from his father. "No one else knows anything, if that's what you're worried about. I've been very careful to ensure that my research didn't compromise your precious security apparatus." "Research? Is that what you're calling it now?" Alexander's temper, carefully controlled through years of royal training, finally began to slip. "Catherine, you accessed Operation Nightingale files. That operation protects agents whose lives depend on secrecy. Your research could have gotten people killed." For the first time, Catherine's composure wavered. "I never intended for anyone to be harmed. I was trying to understand the bigger picture, to see how the decisions being made in those closed-door meetings would affect the kingdom's future. As your wife, don't I have a right to know what forces are shaping our lives? As my wife, you have a responsibility to trust me. As a member of this family, you have an obligation to protect our secrets, not exploit them. Alexander's voice grew harder with each word. You've betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. Catherine removed her gardening gloves with shaking hands. And what happens now, Your Highness? Do you have me arrested? Exiled? Or do we find a way to move forward together? The question pierced straight to the heart of Alexander's dilemma. The evidence against Catherine was overwhelming, but she was still his wife, the woman he had sworn to protect and cherish. Yet she had violated the most basic principles that governed royal life, principles that had preserved the monarchy through countless challenges. I don't know, he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I honestly don't know what happens now. As they stood facing each other in the garden that had once symbolized their shared hopes for the future, both realized that something irreplaceable had been lost. The trust that formed the foundation of their marriage lay in ruins, and neither knew if it could ever be rebuilt. The morning mist had finally lifted, but the shadows falling across Thornbridge Palace seemed darker than ever before. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the East Wing Gardens, and Thornbridge Palace felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. Alexander had retreated into the formal protocols that governed royal crisis management, speaking to Catherine only when absolutely necessary and conducting all interactions with the cold politeness reserved for foreign dignitaries of questionable loyalty. Queen Consort Isabella, Alexander's stepmother, watched the unfolding drama with the calculating eyes of someone who had survived 3 decades of palace intrigue. At 55, she possessed an elegant beauty that had been carefully maintained through the years, but her true power lay in her ability to read the undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface of royal life. She found Alexander in the palace's private chapel, a Gothic sanctuary that had provided solace to Thornbridge monarchs for over 4 centuries. He knelt before the altar in silent prayer, his shoulders rigid with the weight of impossible decisions. Your father dealt with a similar crisis early in his reign, Isabella said softly, her voice echoing in the sacred space. Though the circumstances were quite different. Alexander didn't turn around, but his posture indicated he was listening. I'm not sure anything could compare to this situation, Lady Margaret Ashford, Isabella continued, moving to sit in one of the carved wooden pews. She was engaged to your Uncle Charles before his death. After the funeral, we discovered she had been selling information about royal finances to foreign investors. Your father had loved her like a daughter. This was family history Alexander had never heard before. Carefully buried secrets that predated his birth. What did he do? He gave her a choice. Exile with a modest pension and complete silence about royal affairs, or face a public trial that would have destroyed not only her, but several innocent family members who had unknowingly become involved in her schemes. Alexander finally turned to face his stepmother. She chose exile. She chose survival. And your father chose to show mercy while protecting the crown. Sometimes, Alexander, the hardest decisions are also the wisest ones. The parallel was clear, but Alexander struggled with its implications. Catherine isn't some distant family member, Isabella. She's my wife. The woman I plan to spend my life with to potentially mother my children. How do I reconcile love with duty when they pull in opposite directions? Isabella's expression softened with genuine sympathy. By remembering that the crown doesn't just belong to you, Alexander. It belongs to every citizen of this kingdom. Your personal happiness, as important as it is, cannot come at the expense of national security. Before Alexander could respond, the chapel doors burst open with a force that violated every protocol of royal etiquette. Captain Morrison strode in, his face grim with urgency. Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Alexander rose quickly, recognizing the tone that Morrison used only during genuine crises. What's happened? Agent Collins has uncovered additional evidence regarding Lady Catherine's activities. We've discovered that someone has been attempting to contact her through encrypted channels. Foreign intelligence services, sir. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. If Catherine had been feeding information to foreign agents, this moved far beyond a personal betrayal into the realm of international espionage. Are you certain? The communications are heavily encrypted, but our analysts have identified patterns consistent with known foreign intelligence protocols. Someone has been very interested in the information Lady Catherine could provide. Isabella stood gracefully, her diplomatic instincts taking over. Has she responded to any of these contact attempts? That's what we're still investigating. However, we've detected suspicious network activity from her personal devices that suggests at least some level of communication has taken place. Alexander felt the walls of the chapel closing in around him. Every decision he had agonized over for the past 3 days suddenly seemed naive in comparison to this new development. If Catherine had crossed the line from unauthorized access to active collaboration with foreign powers, there would be no path back to reconciliation. I need to speak with her immediately, Alexander said, his voice carrying the cold authority he had inherited from his father. But this time, the conversation will be conducted under formal protocols. Captain Morrison, please arrange for Lady Catherine to be brought to the State Security Office within the hour. Sir, with respect, Lady Catherine is not currently in the palace. The simple statement sent a chill through Alexander's blood. What do you mean she's not in the palace? Morrison consulted his tablet with the precise movements of a man delivering unwelcome news. She left approximately 2 hours ago, claiming she needed to visit her sister in the city. Her security detail accompanied her as per standard protocol, but they report that she dismissed them at Lady Margaret's residence and has not been seen since. The implications were staggering. If Catherine had fled, it suggested not only guilt, but also advanced knowledge of the investigation's progress. Someone had warned her, which meant the security breach extended beyond a single person. Have we attempted to contact her directly? Alexander asked. Multiple times, sir. Her mobile phone appears to be switched off, and Lady Margaret claims she never arrived at the residence. Alexander turned to Isabella, seeing his own fears reflected in her carefully controlled expression. This changes everything. If she's run, it's essentially an admission of guilt. Not necessarily, Isabella replied, though her tone suggested she didn't fully believe her own words. She might simply be frightened, uncertain of how to handle the situation. Fear makes people act irrationally, even when they're innocent of the worst accusations. Captain Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Highness, there's one more development you should be aware of. We've been monitoring the encrypted communications channels, and there's been a significant increase in activity since Lady Catherine's departure. Someone is very concerned about her current status. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Catherine's unauthorized access to classified files, the foreign intelligence contacts, and now her sudden disappearance all pointed toward a level of betrayal that threatened not just Alexander's marriage, but the security of the entire kingdom. Morrison, I want a full security alert issued immediately. Discreet but comprehensive. Lady Catherine is to be located and brought back to the palace for questioning. Coordinate with the Metropolitan Police and Intelligence Services, but keep this within the smallest possible circle of trusted personnel. Already in progress, sir. However, we should consider the possibility that Lady Catherine may attempt to leave the country. The thought of his wife fleeing to seek asylum with hostile foreign powers was almost too painful to contemplate. Yet Alexander forced himself to consider the possibility with the cold calculation that the Crown demanded. Alert all border controls and airports. If she attempts to leave the country, she's to be detained immediately for questioning. The words felt like betrayal even as he spoke them, but duty left him no choice. Isabella placed a gentle hand on Alexander's arm. I'll speak with your father. He needs to be informed of these developments before they progress any further. The decision about how to handle a potential international incident involving a member of the royal family must come from the king himself. Alexander nodded, grateful for his stepmother's support even as he dreaded the conversation with his father. King Edmund had always viewed personal weakness as the greatest threat to royal authority. Learning that his son's wife had potentially committed treason would trigger a response that prioritized the crown's reputation above all other considerations. As Morrison and Isabella left to attend to their respective duties, Alexander remained alone in the chapel, surrounded by the tombs of ancestors who had faced their own impossible choices. The weight of history pressed down upon him, reminding him that the decisions made in moments of crisis often determined the fate of nations. His mobile phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. Against all security protocols, Alexander opened it immediately, desperate for any communication from Catherine. The game has changed, Alexander. Forces beyond your control are moving pieces on a board you don't even know exists. Trust no one in the palace. Your wife's life depends on your next decision. Choose carefully. A friend. The message disappeared from his screen immediately after reading, leaving no trace of its existence. Alexander stared at the blank display, his mind racing with new possibilities. If Catherine had been manipulated or coerced by forces beyond her control, everything he thought he knew about the situation might be wrong. But the message also raised a terrifying new question. If there were traitors within the palace itself, How could he know who to trust? The very people helping him investigate Catherine's betrayal might be the ones orchestrating it. As evening shadows began to fall across the chapel's stained glass windows, Alexander realized that the crisis engulfing his marriage was just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than he had imagined. The secure conference room in the basement of Thornbridge Palace had been designed during the Cold War to withstand both nuclear attack and electronic surveillance. Now, 24 hours after Catherine's disappearance, it hosted the most sensitive royal crisis meeting in decades. King Edmund sat at the head of the polished oak table, his 70-year-old frame still commanding despite the weight of 4 decades on the throne. His steel-grey eyes moved between the assembled advisors with the predatory focus of someone who had survived countless political storms. Explain to me again how the wife of my heir apparent gained access to our most sensitive intelligence and then vanished into thin air under the watch of our supposedly elite security forces, the king said, his voice carrying the quiet menace that had cowed prime ministers and foreign heads of state. Director General Sarah Blackwood of the Royal Intelligence Service shifted uncomfortably in her chair. At 45, she was one of the youngest people ever to hold a position, but her reputation for ruthless efficiency had earned her the king's confidence. Today, that confidence was being severely tested. Your Majesty, our preliminary analysis suggests this operation has been years in the making. The sophistication of the security breaches indicates professional training and significant resources. Lady Catherine may have been recruited long before her marriage to Prince Alexander. The implication hit the room like a thunderbolt. If Catherine had been a foreign asset from the beginning, it meant her entire relationship with Alexander had been built on deception. Every intimate moment, every shared confidence, every expression of love had been part of an elaborate intelligence operation. Alexander, who had remained silent throughout most of the briefing, finally spoke. Are you suggesting that my marriage was arranged by foreign intelligence services?
It's one possibility we must consider, Your Highness.
The timing of Lady Catherine's introduction to royal circles coincides with increased intelligence activity by several hostile nations. Her father's diplomatic posting provided perfect cover for establishing her credentials within acceptable social circles. Foreign Secretary Robert Ashbourne, a career diplomat with silver hair and shrewd eyes, leaned forward. If that's true, then we're not dealing with a simple security breach. This is a long-term penetration operation that has achieved unprecedented access to the highest levels of government. King Edmund's expression grew even more severe. What specific information has been compromised? Director Blackwood consulted her classified briefing notes. Operation Nightingale is completely blown. We've had to extract 3 agents and abandon years of intelligence gathering. The Meridian Republic trade negotiations have been compromised, costing us significant leverage in ongoing discussions. Most seriously, our defense arrangements with allied nations may need to be completely restructured. The financial cost alone will be in the hundreds of millions, added Chancellor William Hartwell, the kingdom's chief financial advisor. But the diplomatic damage could take decades to repair. Alexander felt each revelation like a knife wound. The woman he had loved and trusted had not only betrayed him personally, but had inflicted catastrophic damage on the nation he was sworn to protect. The magnitude of the deception was almost impossible to comprehend. Have we made any progress in locating Lady Catherine? The king asked. Captain Morrison, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up grimly. We've tracked her movements to a private airfield outside the city. A small aircraft departed for continental Europe approximately 6 hours ago. The flight plan listed a destination in Switzerland, but the aircraft never arrived at its declared landing site. Switzerland, the king mused. Neutral territory with strong banking secrecy laws. An excellent place to disappear or transfer assets. Alexander's phone buzzed with another encrypted message. This time, he hesitated before opening it, acutely aware that every communication could be monitored by the assembled security professionals. Your wife is alive but in grave danger. The people who recruited her are cleaning up loose ends. If you want answers and revenge, meet me at the old boathouse on the north shore of Lake Thornbridge at midnight. Come alone, or she dies. The same friend. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he read the message. The idea of Catherine being in mortal danger overrode every other consideration, even as his rational mind warned him that this could be an elaborate trap. Your Highness, Director Blackwood said, noticing his distraction. Is there something you need to share with us? Alexander made a split-second decision that violated every security protocol he had been taught since childhood. No, nothing important. The lie came easily, born from a desperate need to protect whatever remained of his relationship with Catherine. If there was even a chance she had been manipulated or coerced into her actions, he owed it to their marriage to discover the truth before allowing the royal security apparatus to destroy her completely. King Edmund studied his son with the penetrating gaze that had always been able to detect deception. Alexander, I want you to understand something clearly. Personal feelings cannot be allowed to compromise national security. If you have any information that could help us resolve this crisis, you have a duty to share it immediately. I understand, Father. My loyalty is to the crown above all else. The words tasted like ashes, but they seemed to satisfy the king. The meeting continued for another hour, establishing protocols for damage control and developing strategies for managing the inevitable media attention once news of the scandal broke. As the advisors filed out of the conference room, King Edmund gestured for Alexander to remain behind. Father and son faced each other across the polished table, their relationship strained by the weight of royal duty and personal disappointment. Your judgment has been seriously compromised in this matter, the king said bluntly. I'm temporarily suspending your access to classified briefings and removing you from all sensitive diplomatic activities until this situation is resolved. The demotion was a devastating blow to Alexander's pride and position within the royal hierarchy. Father, you can't seriously believe that I was involved in Catherine's activities. What I believe is irrelevant. What matters is that you allowed personal feelings to blind you to obvious security risks. A future king cannot afford such weakness. Alexander bit back his initial response, recognizing the futility of arguing with a man who had spent 40 years making impossible decisions in service to the crown. How long will this suspension last? Until you demonstrate that you can put duty above personal loyalty. Until you prove that you understand the responsibilities that come with the crown. The conversation ended with both men understanding that their relationship had fundamentally changed. Alexander was no longer just a son seeking his father's approval. He was a potential security risk who needed to be carefully managed until the crisis passed. Later that evening, Alexander stood in his private chambers, staring out at Lake Thornbridge in the distance. The old boathouse was barely visible through the trees, a structure that held childhood memories of summer afternoons spent fishing with his late Uncle Charles. Now it might hold the key to understanding how his life had been so thoroughly destroyed by the woman he had trusted above all others. At 11:30, Alexander slipped out of the palace through a service entrance known only to senior family members. His security detail believed he was asleep in his chambers, protected by electronic surveillance and roving guards. Breaking royal security protocols was a serious offense that could result in his permanent removal from the line of succession. But the encrypted messages had offered something more valuable than personal safety. The possibility of truth. The walk to the boathouse took 20 minutes through familiar woods that now seemed filled with shadows and hidden dangers. Alexander had grown up in these forests, but tonight every rustling leaf and snapping twig suggested potential threats. The boathouse itself was exactly as he remembered from childhood, a weathered wooden structure that extended out over the dark waters of the lake. A single figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight, waiting with the patience of someone accustomed to clandestine meetings. As Alexander approached, he recognized Agent Sarah Collins from the palace security team. Her presence was both reassuring and deeply troubling, suggesting that the conspiracy Catherine had stumbled into extended into the very heart of the royal protection apparatus. Your Highness, Collins said quietly, thank you for coming. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about your wife and the people you trust. Alexander steeled himself for revelations that would either damn Catherine completely or reveal a conspiracy so vast it threatened the very foundations of the monarchy itself. The moonlight reflected off Lake Thornbridge's still waters as Agent Sarah Collins began to unravel a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the royal establishment. Her normally composed demeanor showed cracks of genuine fear as she glanced repeatedly at the surrounding woods. Your Highness, your wife never betrayed the crown, Collins said without preamble. She discovered something that certain people within the palace desperately wanted to keep hidden, and they used her curiosity against both of you. Alexander felt his world shift beneath his feet. Explain that statement. We have concrete evidence of her accessing classified files. Yes, she did access those files, but not to steal information for foreign powers. She was investigating financial irregularities that she'd noticed in routine palace expenditures. What she found was evidence of a systematic embezzlement scheme that has been draining royal funds for over a decade. Collins activated a small tablet, showing financial records that painted a devastating picture of corruption within the royal household. Someone has been skimming money from infrastructure projects, security contracts, and diplomatic expenses. The amounts are carefully calculated to avoid detection, but over 10 years they total nearly £50 million. Alexander studied the documents with growing disbelief. The financial manipulations were sophisticated, requiring intimate knowledge of royal accounting procedures and access to the highest levels of financial oversight. Who could orchestrate something like this? That's what Lady Catherine was trying to determine when she accessed the classified files. She needed to cross-reference financial records with personnel files and operational budgets to identify the responsible parties. Unfortunately, her investigation triggered security alerts that made her appear to be the perpetrator rather than the investigator. The revelation recontextualized everything Alexander thought he knew about the past week. Catherine's guilty behavior and evasive answers suddenly seemed like the actions of someone trying to protect a delicate investigation rather than someone engaged in treasonous activities. "Why didn't she come to me with this information?" Alexander asked. Collins hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to reveal. "Because the evidence strongly suggests that someone very close to you is involved in the embezzlement. Lady Catherine was afraid that approaching you directly might alert the perpetrators and allow them to destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses." The implication hung heavy in the night air. If Catherine had suspected someone in Alexander's inner circle of corruption, her secretive behavior made perfect sense. She had been trying to protect both the investigation and her husband from a betrayal that could destroy the monarchy's reputation. "Who does she suspect?" Alexander demanded. "Chancellor William Hartwell has financial oversight of most royal expenditures. Director General Blackwood has access to operational budgets that have been systematically inflated. Even Captain Morrison's security contracts show irregularities that suggest deliberate manipulation." Alexander felt nauseated as he considered the possibility that people he had trusted with his life might have been systematically robbing the crown for years. Each name Collins mentioned represented a relationship built on mutual respect and shared dedication to royal service. "You said Catherine was in danger. From whom?" "From whoever realized that her investigation was getting close to the truth. The same people who have been manipulating the security alerts to make her appear guilty of espionage. They needed her to disappear before she could present her evidence to appropriate authorities." Collins showed Alexander another set of documents on her tablet. The encrypted communications that our security team detected weren't foreign intelligence contacts trying to recruit Lady Catherine. They were warnings from contacts within the financial intelligence community who had noticed unusual patterns in royal accounts. The sophisticated deception was breathtaking in its scope. Catherine's genuine investigation into corruption had been twisted into evidence of treasonous collaboration with foreign powers. Every security alert and intelligence assessment had been carefully manipulated to support a false narrative that served the real conspirators' interests.
"Where is Catherine now?" Alexander asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion.
"In hiding with the help of financial investigators who understand the danger she's in. The evidence she's gathered is comprehensive enough to expose the entire embezzlement scheme, but only if she lives long enough to present it to uncorrupted authorities." Alexander's mind raced through the implications of Collins' revelations. If Catherine was innocent of espionage but guilty of unauthorized investigation, it meant that their marriage might still be salvageable. More importantly, it meant that the real traitors were still operating within the palace, using the current crisis as cover to eliminate evidence of their crimes. "Why are you telling me this?" "How do I know you're not part of the conspiracy yourself?" Collins smiled grimly. "Because Lady Catherine specifically requested that I contact you if something happened to her. She left detailed instructions about who to trust and how to protect the evidence she'd gathered. She knew the risks of our investigation but felt obligated to pursue the truth regardless of personal cost." The agent handed Alexander a sealed envelope bearing Catherine's handwriting. "She asked me to give you this if we ever met under these circumstances." Alexander opened the envelope with trembling fingers, recognizing Catherine's elegant script immediately.
"My dearest Alexander, if you're reading this letter, then my investigation has been discovered and I've been forced to disappear for both our protection."
"I know how my actions must appear, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain and doubt I've caused you. Everything I've done has been motivated by love for you and loyalty to the crown, even though I know it doesn't seem that way. The evidence I've gathered will prove my innocence, but more importantly, it will expose a conspiracy that threatens everything we both hold dear. Trust Agent Collins. She's one of the few people in the palace who cannot be bought or intimidated. I love you more than life itself, and I pray that someday you'll understand why I had to pursue this investigation in secret. Catherine." Alexander's hands shook as he finished reading. The woman he had loved and lost and condemned was not only innocent but had sacrificed everything to protect the institution he was destined to lead. "What do you need me to do?" he asked Collins. "Help us expose the real conspirators before they succeed in permanently eliminating Lady Catherine and destroying the evidence. The people responsible for this embezzlement have spent years building their scheme and positioning themselves as trusted advisors. They won't hesitate to commit murder to protect their operation." Alexander thought about the security briefing earlier that day, remembering how smoothly Director Blackwood and Chancellor Hartwell had presented evidence of Catherine's guilt. Their performances had been masterful, combining genuine concern for national security with subtle manipulation of facts that supported their false narrative. How do we prove their guilt without alerting them to our suspicions? Collins outlined a complex plan that involved using the existing security protocols against the conspirators. By feeding them false information about Catherine's location and activities, they could force the guilty parties to reveal themselves through their responses to perceived threats. The key is making them believe that Lady Catherine is about to surface with evidence that will expose them. Their reaction will tell us everything we need to know about their involvement and their willingness to commit violence to protect themselves. As Collins explained the details of their strategy, Alexander realized that the next few days would determine not only Catherine's fate, but the future of the monarchy itself. The conspiracy had already inflicted serious damage on royal security and diplomatic relationships. Exposing it would require admitting that the Crown's most trusted advisors had been systematically robbing the institution they were sworn to protect. "There's one more thing you should know," Collins said as their meeting drew to a close. "Your father has been briefed on some of these suspicions, but he's chosen to prioritize the appearance of stability over the pursuit of truth. He believes that exposing the conspiracy would do more damage to the monarchy than allowing the perpetrators to escape justice." The revelation was perhaps the most painful of all. King Edmund's decision to suppress the investigation meant that Alexander was not only fighting to save his marriage, but opposing his father's direct orders. The choice between personal loyalty and institutional duty had become even more complex than he had imagined. As Alexander walked back through the dark woods toward Thornbridge Palace, he understood that the next phase of the crisis would test every principle he had been taught about leadership, loyalty, and the responsibilities of power. The crown he was destined to wear had been tarnished by corruption and betrayal, and only by risking everything he held dear could he hope to restore its honor. The final confrontation came 72 hours later, in the same secure conference room where Alexander had first learned the full scope of his wife's alleged treachery. This time, however, he arrived armed with evidence that would expose the real conspiracy and vindicate the woman he had almost lost forever. Agent Collins had worked tirelessly to verify Catherine's financial investigation, cross-referencing her findings with independent audits and international banking records. The evidence was irrefutable. Chancellor William Hartwell had been systematically embezzling royal funds for over a decade, using his position to authorize fraudulent contracts and manipulate accounting records. Director General Blackwood had provided crucial assistance by ensuring that security investigations were misdirected away from the financial irregularities and toward manufactured threats that served to distract attention from Hartwell's activities. Her access to intelligence databases had allowed her to create false narratives that supported whatever story best served the conspiracy's interests. Captain Morrison's involvement was more limited but equally damaging. He had accepted substantial bribes to overlook security protocol violations and had provided classified information that allowed the conspirators to stay ahead of legitimate investigations. King Edmund sat at the head of the conference table, his expression unreadable as Alexander presented the evidence that exonerated Catherine while simultaneously exposing corruption at the highest levels of the royal establishment. The three accused officials maintained their composure, but subtle signs of tension revealed their awareness that their elaborate deception was finally unraveling. "These allegations are extremely serious," the king said after Alexander finished his presentation. "However, they don't change the fact that Lady Catherine violated security protocols and disappeared under suspicious circumstances." Chancellor Hartwell leaned forward with practiced sincerity. "Your Majesty, while Prince Alexander's loyalty to his wife is commendable, we must remember that these so-called findings come from sources of questionable reliability. Agent Collins has clearly been manipulated by external forces seeking to destabilize the monarchy." Alexander had anticipated this response. "Collins, please present the independent verification we discussed." Agent Collins activated the conference room's secure communication system, establishing a video link with Sir David Whitmore, Catherine's father, and one of the kingdom's most respected retired diplomats. His distinguished presence filled the screen as he began to speak with the measured authority that had earned him international recognition. "Your Majesty, members of the Royal Council, I'm speaking from Geneva, where I've been working with international financial investigators to trace the movement of funds embezzled from royal accounts. The evidence is overwhelming and has been verified by multiple independent sources. Sir David's presentation was devastating in its thoroughness. Bank records showed regular transfers from royal accounts to offshore holdings controlled by shell companies registered in Hartwell's name. Communication intercepts revealed planning sessions where Hartwell and Blackwood discussed methods for eliminating Catherine's investigation. Most damning of all, surveillance footage showed Hartwell meeting with known money launderers in neutral locations designed to avoid detection. Director General Blackwood made one final attempt to control the narrative. Sir David's evidence could easily have been fabricated by hostile intelligence services seeking to discredit our security apparatus. We cannot allow unverified claims to destroy careers and institutional trust. The evidence has been verified by Swiss financial authorities, European banking regulators, and independent auditing firms. Sir David replied calmly. Furthermore, Lady Catherine has agreed to return to the kingdom under protective custody to testify about her findings, provided that appropriate security measures are implemented to ensure her safety. The video feed switched to show Catherine herself, appearing tired but determined as she faced the camera from a secure location in Geneva. Alexander felt his breath catch at seeing her face for the first time since their confrontation in the palace gardens, noting the strain and fear that marked her features. "Your Majesty," Catherine began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I deeply regret the methods I felt compelled to use in investigating these financial irregularities. I understand that my actions violated protocol and caused significant concern about palace security. However, I believe that my findings justify the risks I took and demonstrate my loyalty to the crown rather than any treasonous intent." King Edmund studied his daughter-in-law's image, with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated world leaders for 4 decades. "Lady Catherine, assuming your allegations are proven correct, why did you not bring your concerns directly to myself or Prince Alexander? Because the evidence suggested that people very close to both of you were involved in the embezzlement. I was afraid that approaching you directly might alert the perpetrators and allow them to destroy evidence or escape justice. I also feared that my accusations against such respected officials would not be believed without overwhelming proof." Chancellor Hartwell's composure finally cracked as he realized that his elaborate deception was collapsing around him. "This is preposterous. A foreign influence conspiracy designed to destabilize the monarchy by destroying confidence in its most loyal servants. Your Majesty, surely you can see through this obvious manipulation." "What I see," King Edmund replied with glacial authority, "is evidence that requires immediate and thorough investigation. Captain Morrison, you will surrender your security credentials and submit to questioning by independent investigators. Director Blackwood, your access to classified materials is hereby suspended pending a complete review of your activities. Chancellor Hartwell, you are relieved of all duties effective immediately." The 3 conspirators exchanged glances that confirmed their awareness that the game was over. Years of careful planning and systematic theft had been undone by one woman's determination to protect the institution she had married into. Alexander felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension as he watched justice finally being served. Catherine's vindication meant that their marriage might be salvageable, but the exposure of such extensive corruption would inevitably damage the monarchy's reputation and require years of careful rebuilding to restore public trust. "Catherine," Alexander said, addressing the video screen directly, "when will you be able to return home? Agent Collins has arranged for secure transport within the next 24 hours. Swiss authorities have completed their investigation and are prepared to transfer custody of all relevant evidence to appropriate royal officials." The reunion that followed Catherine's return to Thornbridge Palace was both joyful and bittersweet. Alexander met her at a private airfield, away from media attention and public scrutiny, where they embraced with the desperate intensity of 2 people who had almost lost everything that mattered to them. "I'm so sorry," Catherine whispered against his shoulder. "I never wanted to hurt you or damage our marriage. I just couldn't stand by and watch criminals steal from the crown while hiding behind their positions of trust." "You did what you had to do," Alexander replied, holding her tighter. "Your courage exposed a conspiracy that could have continued for years if left unchecked. The methods you used may have been questionable, but your motives were beyond reproach." The weeks that followed brought significant changes to the royal establishment. New security protocols were implemented to prevent future embezzlement schemes. Financial oversight was expanded to include independent auditors with no connection to palace officials. Most importantly, procedures were established to encourage reporting of suspicious activities without fear of retaliation. The scandal inevitably became public knowledge, but the royal family's transparent handling of the crisis actually enhanced rather than damaged their reputation. By demonstrating that no one was above scrutiny and that corruption would be punished regardless of position or privilege, they reinforced the principles of accountability that formed the foundation of constitutional monarchy. Chancellor Hartwell, Director Blackwood, and Captain Morrison faced criminal prosecution for their crimes, receiving sentences that reflected both the severity of their offences and their violation of sacred trusts. The stolen funds were largely recovered and returned to royal accounts, though the damage to institutional relationships required years of patient rebuilding. For Alexander and Catherine, the crisis had tested their marriage in ways they could never have anticipated, ultimately strengthening rather than destroying their bond. They had learned that love without trust was meaningless, but also that trust could be rebuilt when both parties shared commitment to truth and justice. 6 months later, as they walked together through the East Wing Gardens, where their confrontation had begun, Alexander reflected on the lessons the crisis had taught him about leadership, loyalty, and the complex responsibilities of power. The white roses Catherine had planted continued to bloom, symbolizing the resilience of beauty even in the aftermath of betrayal and pain. "Do you ever regret the path you chose?" Alexander asked as they paused beside the rose bed. Catherine considered the question carefully before responding. "I regret the pain it caused us both, and I regret the damage done to people we trusted. But I don't regret exposing the truth, even when that truth was difficult to accept." Alexander nodded, understanding that the choices they had made during those dark days would continue to influence their relationship and his approach to leadership for years to come. The crown would always demand difficult sacrifices, but the crisis had taught him that sometimes the greatest sacrifice was the willingness to challenge comfortable assumptions in pursuit of truth and justice. As the sun set over Thornbridge Palace, casting long shadows across the gardens where their love had been tested and ultimately redeemed, Alexander and Catherine faced the future with hard-won wisdom about the price of power and the value of unwavering moral courage. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed them had ultimately made them stronger, both as individuals and as guardians of an institution that belonged not to them personally, but to all the people they served. The palace walls that had witnessed centuries of royal intrigue would add their story to the long history of monarchs who had faced impossible choices and emerged with honor intact, proving that even in an age of cynicism and corruption, truth and justice could still prevail when defended by those willing to risk everything in their pursuit.